I'm looking forward to when we start getting our group back. Seems a little sparse in here still. So we're on Leviticus chapter 25 this morning, and we're going to talk about, this chapter spends most of its time talking about the year of Jubilee, which is in a lot of ways akin to the Sabbath. So I want to start off by going back and thinking about the Sabbath for a couple of minutes. Before I do that, though, I want to look at my notes and realize I skipped something. If you go to the very last verse of Leviticus, it says these, and I'm paraphrasing here, it says these are the laws that were given to Moses by God at the Mount Sinai. So this is what he's rehearsing these back to him again. If you go to Exodus chapter 34, it tells us that Moses told the children of Israel all the laws. So as we're thinking about the children of Israel, we're still thinking of them early in their 40 years of wandering. The tabernacle was built at the beginning of the second year, or put together, maybe I should say. They started having the tabernacle worship. And so we have this concept here, and Leviticus seems to be a book that says, okay, let's put all this in order. And so timeline doesn't always flow real well with us, but it's a good rehearsing of it, or going through it. And as we think about the children of Israel and the Sabbath, and we talked about this in the past, it's kind of like, okay, here they are coming out of Egypt, where they've been enslaved, and they have, all of a sudden, God saying, here, you have to take a day of rest. Cease your work. Pay attention to me. And everything we see them doing, all of these laws that we see God giving them, seem to be saying, hey, you need to remember to focus on me. You need to remember that I have brought you out of Egypt. You need to remember that word remember is important, because if they didn't remember, then they stopped paying attention. Sometimes they stopped paying attention anyway, just like we do. So the Sabbath here, imagine that you've been in the wilderness a year, and you get up on Friday morning, and there's manna on the ground. It's been that way for months. You go out and you pick. How many times do you think they had to go through the concept of don't get more than what you're going to get on one day before they realized, hey, if I pick up too much on one day, it's going to spoil and stink, and and yet on Friday morning they go out and they get enough for 2 days, because there's not going to be any on the Sabbath, on Saturday. And so they're getting used to this. How much do you think God was teaching them to depend upon Him? And that was one of the ways He started doing it. They depended upon Him for their very bread every morning. And so when it came to the Sabbath, they didn't go out and pick up the manna. They already had it from the day before. They knew from experience that if they went out Monday morning and picked up 2 days, that wasn't going to work very well. So they were getting to see God saying something and it come to happen. And so on the Sabbath, they weren't to do any work. Now we have the Lord of the Sabbath in the New Testament saying that the Sabbath was made for man and not the man for the Sabbath. And we can kind of see, okay, we kind of understand that. But did that mean that the children of Israel didn't have to pay attention to the Sabbath? No, there were consequences for that. So when we get into chapter 25, we see the children of Israel in a position where they know what the Sabbath is. They've been doing it. And now God starts talking about a time in the future where they're going to have something more than that. So let's start in chapter 25 in the first verse. And Jehovah spake unto Moses in the Mount Sinai, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When you come into the land which I give you, then shall the land keep a Sabbath unto Jehovah. 6 years shalt thou sow thy field, and 6 years shalt thou prune thy vineyard, and gather the fruits thereof. But in the 7th year shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath unto Jehovah. Thou shalt neither sow thy field nor prune their vineyard. Now, let's stop there for a minute. So the picture we're seeing here is they're saying, okay, we're going to go into this promised land. They see it coming. And he says, okay, when you come into the promised land, I want you to realize that 6 years you can prune your vineyards, sow your ground, you can reap it. But in that 7th year, you're not going to sow and you're not going to reap. And how does that relate to them understanding that God is providing their daily bread with the manna now? Do you kind of see okay, well, we see this as a balancing act. Okay, we can do that type thing. But he goes on in verse 5, and he says, That which grows of itself of thy harvest shalt you not reap, and the grapes of the undressed vine thou shalt not gather. So the things they didn't sow, but anything that grows up by itself, they're not supposed to reap. The grapevines they don't cut down, but they're not pruning back and taking care of. And they're still going to grow grapes every year. He says, but you're not going to go out and harvest those. It shall be a year of solemn rest for the land, and the Sabbath of the land shall be food for you, and food for you, for thee and for thy servant, and for thy maid, and for thy hired servant, for the stranger, for the sojourner with thee, and for thy cattle, and for the beasts that are in thy land, and all the increase thereof shall be for food. Now, if they're not going to reap it, how is it for their food? What's the difference between reaping it and it being their food? How can they eat it if they don't reap it? It's a different way of gathering. That's the point. They're not. Remember the children of Israel. We'll get into this a little bit more, but just briefly here. When they went into the land, they were assigned plots of land, and this was theirs perpetually. Okay, and those plots of land generally were used for food production, whether it be in cattle or sheep or wheat or grapes or olives or whatever. So he's saying, when you get into the land, you can use your land, you can harvest it, you can store it up, you can sell it, you can eat it. You know, it's for your increase. But in that 7th year, you don't go out and harvest it all in. Doesn't mean you can't go out and get a grape to eat, or an olive to eat, or wheat for your day, or something like that. But the difference is in what we might see at the end of the summer when the combines come through and just take all the wheat or all the cotton and harvest all of that produce. And so he's saying, you can use it for food. The cattle can eat it. You can use it to eat, but you're not going to harvest it. You're not going to go out and get it for yourself like that. A little different concept than we normally think of, but it's important to make that difference. Now, think of it from the standpoint, they're not there yet. But when they get to the 7th year, the Sabbath year, and their year started in spring, they would get the spring harvest in, the early wheat or whatever. But They don't harvest that. They don't plant. They don't harvest the end of the summer crop. They go the whole year. You think there's any faith involved in that? How hard would it be to, I need to go lay some up for tomorrow. I need to go out and gather some in. He said, no, you're not supposed to do that. So we see the Sabbath year. Every 7 years you see that. Now, when I was growing up, one of the things I was taught was that farming back then, I don't know if it's like that today or not, it was good to leave the land fallow for a year, but that was different than what they were doing. When we would leave land fallow for a year, you might plow it under and just not plant anything, give the ground time to get the minerals back. But see, they didn't do that. They just didn't plant, and they didn't cut down their vines. It just kept growing up. Yeah. Also think, okay, next year comes along, guess what? They got all these weeds they got to pull out. But still, that's what God said to do. So now we start in verse 8. Yes, sir.
Just a couple of things. One interesting point is that not everyone, there's some differences whether this happened all at the same time, like everyone had the seventh year at the same time, or it was different. Different people had the seventh year at the same time. So there's some different people who think differently, which would have been interesting.
Yeah.
And then second, this is going back to the ideal. This is going back to the Garden of Eden. You just rely on God to produce it, and then you just go out there and pick the fruit. And it's going back to the ideal of what it's supposed to be.
And that is probably the main theme of this entire chapter, is the way God wants it, supposed to be, the way he made it. And we'll get there as we go through. Verse 8. And thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years unto thee, 7 times 7 years, and there shall be unto thee the days of the 7th Sabbath of years, even 49 years. Then thou shalt send abroad a loud trumpet on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the day of atonement you shall send abroad the trumpet throughout all of your land. And you shall hallow on the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof, and it shall be a jubilee unto you. Now, I want to stop here long enough to talk about this word jubilee for a second. Now, I want you to think of jubilee, but not in a religious context for a minute, okay? Just think of the word jubilee. Now, I know it's like when you go to the doctor and they put a stethoscope on you and say, deep breath, deep breath, deep breath. Now breathe normally. How do you breathe normally when you're thinking about it? It's almost impossible. Okay, you're in a church building, think what not about jubilee is in the Bible. What does the word jubilee bring to mind?
Parades.
What?
Parades.
Parades? Celebrations? What else? I heard somebody say something else. Celebrations? Parades? What kind of holidays do you think about? 4th of July, New Year's Day. You think this is the kind of viewpoint we have of Jubilee with that word. And I want you to think as we go through the rest of this, what Jubilee meant to them. Because I don't believe it was the same thing. And when we get to the end, I want you to be thinking about, okay, here is how, if I saw somebody, this would be what would be Jubilee for them, okay? Well, just as we go through here. Now, the word Jubilee in Hebrew actually is talking about a ram's horn, okay? It could be, it's talking about as ram's horn as a wind instrument, is blowing it, okay? And so when it talks about sounding the trumpet throughout all of the land. Oh, by the way, what was the 10th day of the 7th month? That was the Day of Atonement. So on the 50th year, on the Day of Atonement, they send trumpets throughout the land. Now, the word that's translated trumpets means more of a curved horn for blowing, generally a cow or a goat or something like that. But the word that's translated jubilee is specifically a ram's horn. Now, when you think about a trumpet being sounded and you think about jubilee, I think of, just a happy sound, this being proclaimed throughout the land. This is jubilee. This is this special time. And then the verse continues. And ye shall return every man into his possession, and ye shall return every man into his family. Yeah, let's stop there for just a second. I spoke previously just of the fact that the Israelites, the 12 tribes, were assigned lands. And the tribe of Levi was separate. They didn't get land, but they had 6 cities. Was it 6 cities? 6 cities of refuge, 49 cities total. I get my numbers mixed up there, I forget. But they were given cities. And the land for Roger's in the family of Gallie, the tribe of Gallie, and they're given this land, and that pew right there is Roger's. And if Roger's not going to harvest all of the fruit off of that pew, then he can sell that pew. Or he can sell himself. And in the year of Jubilee, he is returned to his property. He is returned to his family. That's the way it was with the Jews. So on the year of Jubilee, and it gets into it a little more detail as we go on, but the general rule is in the year of Jubilee, a man returns to his family. He returns to his inheritance. Keep that in your mind because that's important. And then it goes on and does just a little clarification here in verse 11. A jubilee shall be that 50th year be unto you. You shall not sow, neither shall you reap that which groweth of itself in it, nor gather the grapes in it of the undressed vines, for it is a jubilee. It shall be a holy unto you. You shall eat the increase thereof out of the field. Go down to verse 20. Let's jump down there for just a second. Verse 20. Now, what we've read so far is kind of like the summary. And then it, as many of the writings in Hebrew does, it gives us a summary, and it gives us a little more detail. So let's go down to verse 20 and look at some of this detail about this just a minute. And it says, and if ye shall say, what shall we eat in the 7th year? Behold, we shall not sow, nor gather in our increase. Then will I command my blessing upon you in the 6th year, and it shall bring forth fruit for 3 years. And ye shall sow in the 8th year, and eat of the fruits of the old store until the 9th year. Until its fruits come in, ye shall eat the old store. I want you to think of the children of Israel for a minute. When they get into their promised land, when they get into their promised land, they have 6 years where they're harvesting their fruit, they're taking the increase into their barns, they're selling, they're doing all the normal things. And then on the Day of Atonement, if you remember, on the Day of Atonement is the 10th day of the 7th month. On the 15th day of that month, they start the Feast of Booths. And that is the day that they're actually finished. That's the feast is reminding them that they lived in tents in the wilderness. But it's also considered the end of the harvest. In other words, all of the harvest has been brought in by that time. So in the 7th year, or in the end of the 6th year, When they get to the 10th of the month in Atonement, then they have the Feast of Booths. They don't sow their winter wheat or winter whatever it is that they harvest in the spring. They don't gather in the spring. They don't harvest in the fall. So what they've harvested in the 6th year, they go through, and then they go through the Feast of Booths again. And in general, they didn't sow then either. So they could reap in the beginning of the 8th year. And then they could sow and reap at the end. But in the year of Jubilee, it was different. In the 50th year, the end of the 7th month of the 6th year, they gather in the harvest. They don't sow, they don't reap. Come springtime, they're not reaping. Come fall, they're not reaping. Come spring, oh, this is the year of Jubilee. We're not sowing, we're not reaping. Come fall, we're not reaping again. Then, in the spring of in the first of the 9th year, 7th, 8th, first of the 9th year, they sow again. So it's really not until the fall of the 9th year that they get to harvest again. Hey, wait a minute. That's a long time to go without harvesting your land. How much faith did that take? Now and once again, they could go out and, pick stuff off to eat for the day, but they didn't harvest it. They didn't bring it in. Their cattle could eat it. Now, the interesting thing is, I haven't found in the Old Testament where they actually did it. I don't know that they ever did it like they were supposed to. I don't know that they didn't, and it's not recorded. But that's what God told them to do. And it's just kind of amazing in my head to think about it. But back to what Zach said earlier, this is kind of like, okay, this is bringing it back to the way it was supposed to be. So let's go back to, yes, sir.
So when God sent them to exile,
Uh-huh.
part of the reason he said is because they hadn't done this
Yeah.
for a long time. And I think it's like, I forgot how long, but it was a long time. It was like the entire time that they've been almost existed that they hadn't celebrated. So he says, I'm going to have my rest for the land.
The land is going to rest, and it rested for 70 years. Was it 70?
Yes.
Yeah, 70 years.
You can do the math there. How many days it is, but yeah.
It's kind of, and you think about, but I keep relating this back to, okay, here they're getting their daily bread and manna when this is given. They go 40 years with him feeding them daily, and then he says, this is what I want you to do when you get there. And you think they would have been trained up enough to do it, but we don't see the evidence of that. Verse 13. This is a little more detail here. In this year of Jubilee, you shall return every man into his possession. Think about, each person going back to the land that was given him when they entered in, that was assigned to him when they entered into the land of promise. Okay? And if thou sell aught unto thy neighbor, or buy of thy neighbor's hand, ye shall not wrong one another. Now, this is a principle he puts in here you're going to see several times. He's telling them, when you buy from somebody, when you buy their land, when you buy the produce of their land, whatever, you're not supposed to wrong them. You're supposed to treat them fairly. And I'm going to jump ahead of myself and remind you that he also said, how are you supposed to treat the sojourners in your land?
The same way as the native.
Same way as the natives. So he's saying, he's really saying, you're not supposed to harm any, you're supposed to treat everybody right. Okay? So that's an important point in here. You shall not wrong one another. Now, let's see how he's talking about wronging one another in the next verse. According to the number of years after Jubilee, thou shalt buy thy neighbor, and according unto the number of years of the crops shall he sell unto thee. So, okay. We're in the 45th year. I'm going to buy Josh's land from him. What I'm really buying is 5 years, or 4 actually, because there's 2 years of rest in there. That's all I'm paying him for. That's all he's getting at. Then it goes back to him. Not like we think of, hey, I'm going to buy your house. It's mine forever. In fact, he addresses that in here some, okay? So understand what he's talking about here. He's saying, here's your inheritance, and on the 50th year that they haven't been celebrating, it comes back to you, even if you've sold it. Yes, sir.
Sorry for coming in last.
That's all right. It's exciting.
So this is how God dealt with one of the principles of economics, that power or money and property collect to a few individuals. That's just the nature of economics. That's what it does. Because this person has a hard time, he has to sell his property, he has to sell even himself. Well, he can't build money, and he's lost. And that goes for several generations after that, and that affects several generations after that. So this is God's way of doing a reset. Everyone gets back to the same level again of where they started. And I mean, it takes a lot of, that's great for the poor people, but also for the rich people is the ones that actually have to follow through this, and they take a huge hit in doing that.
They take a hit and they don't take a hit because they're only paying for the part that they're supposed to be getting, but they didn't do it the right way, so, yeah. And now I'll take this a step further than what you said, and we're going to read it in here. God says, hey, it's my land.
True, yeah.
He says, it's not yours to sell, it's mine. So, that we see what God is saying here. Now, start thinking about how that applies to us, how that principle applies to us as we go on here. So, he's saying the number of years, the number of years of crops, how much it's worth, that's how you barter back and forth. Okay. According to verse 16, according to the multitude of years of the crop shall he sell unto thee. According to the multitude of years shalt thou increase the price thereof, and according to the fewness of the years shalt thou diminish the price of it. For the number of crops doth he sell unto thee. And ye shall not wrong one another, but ye shall fear thy God, for I am Jehovah your God. And we're back to that phrase again where he's saying, I'm telling you this. You need to do this. You need to pay attention. I brought you out of Egypt. I gave you the promises. I'm bringing you to this promised land. You need to do this. So he's saying, okay, don't wrong another. Calculate out what things are fair. Sell, buy, and do those things from that nature. Okay. And then verse 18, we get into some of the warnings. Wherefore ye shall do my statutes, and keep my ordinances, and do them, and ye shall dwell in the land safely. Let's stop there for a minute. Some of the interesting things of the Old Testament have to do with the promises of God. This is one of them. He says, you keep my ordinances, you do what I've commanded, and you'll dwell in safety. I didn't look it up, and I'll apologize for that. I'll try to remember to do it for next week. But there's a place where when they're in their new land, they have to go to the temple 3 times a year for the sacrifices. And God said, when you're doing this, nobody's going to invade your land. You don't have to worry about that. I'm going to take care of it. Now, once again, think about the faith involved here. Who is God? What has he done? How has he proven himself to us? And do we trust him? Did they trust him? Okay, let's keep going. And the land, not only will you live in safety, and the land shall yield its fruit, and you shall eat your fill and dwell therein in safety. And if you say, what shall we eat the seventh year? We've already read this. Go down to verse 23. And the land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine, for you are strangers and sojourners with me. Now, how many times has he reminded them that they were in the strangers in the land of Egypt and how they were treated there? He told them, you're not supposed to do that. We've read that several times. Remember, you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You need to treat sojourners in your land with righteousness, for lack of a better term. Yes, sir.
It's almost like the golden rule coming to effect, isn't it?
It's kind of like the concept that a lot of people have, which is not really true, but karma. You know, what you give out comes back, and that's not really a biblical principle, I don't think. But it's yeah. He's
Man sows, so shall he reap.
well, that's true too, but not necessarily in this life.
Not necessarily, although
It does happen, yes. Okay, so verse 24. And in all the land of your possession ye shall grant a redemption for the land. Now, real quickly in concept here. Okay, I own this plot of land. It was designated to my great-grandfather. He was in the tribe of Benjamin. So I have this plot of land. He's had 10 kids. The whole family is still living on this plot of land mostly. The ones that aren't have gone off somewhere else, but we still own this plot of land. I'm the head of the household. It's there forever. Now, does the phrase return to his property mean a little bit more now? He's saying, this is where it's going to be. This is what you've been assigned. This is your inheritance. What is our inheritance? What? I saw you say something. Heaven, eternal life. That's what has been granted to us as inheritance. That's where we're supposed to be. It's there for us. Yes, sir.
I always associated this buying and selling of the land more like we would think of in terms of a lease. It's for a set period of time, and then it goes back to the original owner.
And that was the law. That was the law of God. Yeah, that was how it worked. Well, that's how it was supposed to work. To go on from there. And then, how do you treat one another? Verse 25, if your brother be waxed poor and sell some of his possession, then shall his kinsman that is next to him come and redeem that which his brother has sold. So, once again, same concept, except now he's extending, saying, wait a minute, he's fallen on hard times, and he's your brother, and he sold his land. You need to go redeem it for him. You need to buy it back. Why didn't he just buy it and sell it to him to start with? I don't know. But the concept is we're supposed to take care of our brothers. Okay? Okay.
What I like about this there is, as you get later on in the chapter, even if you lend or somebody borrow from you, you're not supposed to charge them interest.
Yeah. And that's, we'll get to it, but I'm going to go ahead and say something now because we're running short on time. And that is the fact that, once again, we're supposed to treat one another fairly. We're supposed to take care of our brothers. We're supposed to take care of the sojourners. We're supposed to not take advantage. We're not supposed to take advantage of people. And it gives us reasons there, but hey, you're sojourners in my land, God says. And if a man have no one to redeem it, and he wax, and he grow rich, and find sufficient to redeem it, then let him reckon the years of the sale thereof, and restore the overplus to the man who he sold it to, and it shall return to his possession. So he sells the land, he manages to get enough money back, he buys it back, once again, in the fairness of time. But if he is not able to get it back for himself, then that which he has sold shall remain in the hand of him that hath bought it until the year of Jubilee. And in the year of Jubilee it shall go out, and he shall return unto his possession. That phrase again. So, as Zach used the term, and I was going to surprise you with it later, it's the Great Reset. And we've heard that recently during COVID. People talked about the Great Reset in the U.S., how we were changing things and reset. This is God's Great Reset. He says, the man returns to his possession. Okay, and if a man sells a dwelling house in a walled city, then he may redeem it within the whole year after it is sold. For a full year shall he have the right of redemption. And if it be not redeemed within the space of a full year, then that house that is in the walled city shall be made sure in perpetuity to him that bought it throughout his generations. It shall not go out in Jubilee. So his exception here is, hey, here's a walled, a fortified city. Can somebody name me a city that had a wall around it? Jerusalem. It's the first one that comes to mind. So if you bought a house or land inside of the walled city and it wasn't redeemed or bought back within a year, it was yours forever until you sold it. So it's kind of, and why would this be? Because he goes on to say here that that's not so out in the fields, outside the walled city. No, it goes back in Jubilee. So why is the walled city different?
Because a specific house within a city would not have been part of your initial inheritance, like a piece of land, farm.
Okay. I think it's more from, that's not a bad assumption. I was thinking it was more from the concept of, wait a minute, what he's talked about before has been growing food, growing, producing things. Walled cities, there's not room for that. So this is a dwelling place, but not a homestead. Okay, maybe I'm using that term wrong. I'm using it from my roots, where it was a big plot of land that you made your living on, type thing. So, yeah, we don't know for sure, but this is the law. And so within the city, within a walled city, a protected city, these rules did not apply as far as the land goes. Okay, so let's skip down to verse 35. Oh, wait a minute, I need to go back. I missed a little bit there. Verse 32, nevertheless, the cities of the Levites, the houses of the cities of their possession, may the Levites redeem at any time. And if one of the Levites redeem, then the house that was sold in the city of his possession shall go out in the year of Jubilee. So, in the Levites who were not granted land, but were granted some cities, then their possession within that city was returned to them in the year of Jubilee. It was not sold for perpetual possession. Okay, verse 35. And if thy brother be waxed poor and his hand fell with thee, then thou shalt uphold him. As a stranger and a sojourner shall he live with thee. Okay, so how was the stranger and the sojourner supposed to live with you when they came into their land? You're supposed to treat them like a native, right? Okay, so treat them fairly. You're supposed to take care of them. Thou shalt take thou no interest of him or increase, but fear thy God. I keep wondering why he keeps saying fear God when he says don't take interest from them. I guess it's because that's a big temptation for us to make a profit. No, fear God, do what I say. And that thy brother may live with thee. Thou shalt not give him thy money upon interest, nor shalt thou give him victuals for increase. In other words, you're not going to sell him food, you give it to him. I am Jehovah your God, who brought you forth out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be your God. So he's saying, okay, when people fall on hard time, if your brother falls on hard time, then you're supposed to take care of them. You are your brother's keeper. A different phrase. Now, back when I was a kid, one of the things that the Jews were known for was taking care of one another. I don't know if it's still that way or not. I do not know. But that was a big thing back when I was a teenager. And it was a common, what's the term when you classify a group of people as something?
Stereotype?
Stereotype, yeah. That's it. So, this was kind of the way they were thought of. They were shrewd businessmen. They took care of their own. They went to their own for business. If there's 2 dry cleaners and one of them was Jewish and one of them wasn't, they went to the Jewish one. They took care of one another. And I think that comes from this type of law. Verse 39, and if thy brother be waxed poor with thee and sell himself to thee. Now, we don't think of this that often, but one of the ways they would cover their debts, deal with problems, they would sell themselves to somebody. In this case, they're talking about brothers, not necessarily blood brothers, as in same mother and father, but brothers as a nation. If your brother sells himself to you, I would equate this today, and as we read, you'll see this is much the same, I think. Much like we might promise to work for somebody for so many years. But still, it's under their control. To sell himself to thee, thou shalt not make him to serve as a bondservant, as a hired servant, and as a sojourner he shall be with thee. He shall serve with thee unto the year of Jubilee, and then shall he go out from thee, he and his children with him, and shall return unto his own family, and unto the possession of his fathers shall he return. For they are my servants, whom I brought forth out of the land of Egypt. Oh, there's so much more in here that I want to cover, but I want to get to the close of this before the end of this lesson here, because it ties together so well.
How often did Jubilee come?
Every 50 years. 7 Sabbaths, and then seven seventh years, which is 49, and then the next year was the year of Jubilee. So, verse 55, for unto me the children of Israel are servants. They are my servants, whom I brought forth out of the land of Egypt. I am Jehovah your God. When I think of Jubilee in connection with this, with what we've read and the parts that we haven't, talking about how God was setting it back, this was the way he gave it to them. They were supposed to keep it in perpetuity that way. When I think of the word Jubilee, I think of a small child who really, really, really wants a dog. And then one day, mom and daddy walk in with this puppy, and this little boy or girl just crying, holding on, just crying out of pure happiness. This is the way it's supposed to be. They understand that. This is what it's supposed to be. I think that's what God was trying to do with Jubilee. He was trying to get everybody back to where it's supposed to be. This is where I want you to be, in the promised land. Joyous. Okay, shifted today. What's our promised land? Eternal life. Kingdom of God. Church. How do you want to phrase that? Where are we supposed to be? What is our possession? What is our Jubilee? If you were to think today, what would bring that kind of reaction to somebody? What is Jubilee today to somebody? Have you ever seen somebody that was baptized and just broke out crying out of pure joy? They realize their sins are forgiven. That's the picture I see. God says, this is the way it's supposed to be. And not only are you supposed to do this, but you're supposed to bring others into it as well. It's a picture that is hard to imagine, and that's why I've tried to put it in these terms. We see this. It should be a joyous occasion. It should be our own possession. It should be our promised land.
Jesus, when he started his ministry, he said that he came to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, or the year of Jubilee. That's how he saw his ministry.
It's so cool to me. It ties together so well. We see in the Old Testament being a shadow to the New Testament. And this should be something that helps us understand that our daily bread is provided by God. The things that we need are provided by God. We have an eternal possession. Are we going to walk away from it and not do what he says? That's the lesson. Thank you for your attention and your comments today.